1 year ago, I decided to pack my bags and leave the country. I booked myself a one-way ticket and headed to Newcastle Airport, only to get there and realise the entire airport was empty. That's because I was leaving during stage 4 national lockdown. But that wasn't going to stop me going abroad though to gain my freedom, because I was sick of being stripped of my rights and being forced to stay indoors. And before long, I was boarding my first flight to London, where I could catch another flight to leave the country. Once I arrived, I booked myself into a 5-star hotel for 2 days because I needed some important documents in London to board my next plane out of the country. Welcome guys to the very first episode of the Bangla Flame journey, where I'm creating a new food brand abroad in Bangladesh to launch and trial out here before bringing it back to you guys in the UK. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at when I left the UK and the process I had to go through in order to leave the country. So without wasting any more time, let's get into today's blog. 1 year ago, I decided to pack my bags and leave the country for a bit. I booked a one-way ticket to Bangladesh and flew out from Newcastle Airport, and when I got there, I realised the entire airport was empty, and that's because I flew out during the stage 4 national lockdown during the flight ban. At the time, the British government insinuated we weren't allowed to fly out the country. However, I couldn't find any written laws to stop us doing so. It was a difficult time for the nation, as all of us were being ordered to stay indoors, locked in our own homes like prisoners. Customs let us through without any questions, and I proceeded to the departure lounge with a little more hope that I'd fly out to my final destination without being lawfully stopped. There were many things running through my mind, as airports and airline companies were changing the rules every day for passengers. It was a very uncertain time with very little communication between the governments, the airports, airline companies and the embassies. Fortunately, up to this stage, everything went to plan, and I boarded my first of 3 flights to Bangladesh. Next stop, London Heathrow. As I arrived in London, I couldn't help but feel anxious, wondering if I would make it to Bangladesh or if I would be denied access to my flight again. That's right, I had actually tried to fly out 1 month earlier and was not allowed to because I had the incorrect documentation. The procedures I had followed on the gov.uk website did not match the requirements of Qatar Airways, so because of their lack of communication and the forever changing COVID rules, I failed my first attempt to leave the country. Once I arrived in Heathrow, I decided to book myself into a 5-star hotel, as I'd be staying in London for 2 nights before boarding my next flight. The reason for this is because I had 2 important appointments booked over the next 2 days, one at the Fleet Street Clinic and one at the High Commission office at the Bangladesh Embassy. I was told by Qatar Airways that I needed to update the no visa required on my passport, and I had to take a new type of COVID test at the clinic, which at the time was not available in most of the country. And believe me when I say it, all this was not cheap. It was a huge price to pay to leave the country, and several times I considered cancelling it all and staying in Newcastle. However, you can't put a price on your freedom, and overcoming this difficult time was the best decision I ever made. I had arrived in the Sofitel Hotel and was looking forward to a comfortable stay so I'd gather my thoughts, as it was an extremely stressful process trying to leave, and the biggest anxiety was to come over the next 2 days.
If you do need anything, just dial 0. Okay?
Thank you very much, sir. Cheers.
Time to go find my hotel room. Things got a little tricky here and the lift made an idiot out of us. I didn't realise the sign saying you had to scan your hotel card onto that little button before you press which floor you're going to. I guess that's just for security purposes, but eventually I got the lift moving, but things just got even more confusing when I got out. It was like walking around Pan's Labyrinth, trying to find my room, and after hitting several dead ends, I finally found it. Just as I fell back on the bed, I heard a knock at the door. It was the hotel porter who had brung up my luggage, and I didn't know what to do when he stood there afterwards, so I ended up giving him a £5 tip just to go away. Then I relaxed for a bit and thought about the next 2 days ahead, as it was going to require a lot of travelling across London. I contacted my friend Kelvin, who picked us up in his taxi, and so the journey across London began as I headed to the Fleet Street Clinic, which at the time was one of the only places in England offering an RT-PCR test. This reverse transcriptase test gave a more accurate reading and was required by Qatar Airways to board any flights. We're past Her Majesty's Crib, Buckingham Palace, and plenty of other sites which had historical British architecture, and that was pretty cool to see. After driving many miles, I reached the clinic and a sense of dread overcame us as I wondered what I would do if the test came back positive, because not only would I be denied my flights, but it had also cost us £495, basically £500 to do the test. And I'd be due to come back again tomorrow as I'd paid for a test where I received the result within 24 hours. I felt nervous on my way back to the hotel, by which point my taxi fare had reached over £100, and I couldn't help wondering if all this money and effort was even worth trying to go abroad. So I did what I always do when I'm worrying: comfort eat. I grabbed a kebab from the nearest takeaway and headed back into the 5-star hotel. I mean, who even does that? I had a little bit of class though. I ordered a plate from room service. Later that night, I ordered more food from the hotel restaurant and watched a movie to help ease the worrying. Eventually, I did manage to get some sleep though, as I reminded myself I had an even more important day ahead tomorrow. The next morning, Kelvin came to pick us up again and drove us to the High Commission office at the embassy. I remember feeling proud because, as a kid, my dad had told us about his experiences here, and here I was myself now as a young man, dependent on this embassy. My dad's words gave us the confidence I needed to face up to the next task of receiving my renewed no visa required, which I had reapplied for several weeks earlier. I was so nervous to see if they had processed it on time, but as my dad promised, the Bangladesh embassy didn't let us down. The feeling of happiness as I drove away from the embassy was tremendous. It refired my hopes that this plan was going to work and that my test would come back negative and I'd have all the correct documentation in order to fly out the country the next day. The feeling of dread started creeping in as I headed back to the clinic for my result, but fortunately it came back negative, and this left us feeling really happy at the time. Considering the good news and the fact I'd not be eating junk food for a while if I did fly out, I ordered myself another takeaway to celebrate as I prepare to relax later that night and focus on not sleeping in and missing my flight the next day. When it turned night, I got hungry again and ordered myself a pizza, along with plenty of pop and water because the hotel prices were extortion. Just as well no one saw us walking into my room because I would have looked like a right tit. That night, I chilled with snacks and watched a few movies before taking myself to bed. The next morning, I woke up nice and early, leaving us plenty of time to fill out these passenger consent forms for Qatar Airways because I'm a last minute person like that. After successfully getting down the lift this time without any hiccups, I checked out of the hotel and took a deep breath as I took the final walk back into Heathrow Airport with what I was praying was the right documentation for Qatar Airways to give me the go-ahead to fly. As I left the hotel, I could feel the fear coming back over us as I walked through the connected corridors to Terminal 5 in Heathrow Airport. It was here that my fate awaited, all this build-up to one single moment, which would either see us fly out the country or send me home back to Newcastle with a failed plan which I certainly wouldn't have the mental or physical energy to pursue again. It had been a month since I had done this exact same walk only to be denied entry to the plane, and every single day felt like a million years as I counted down the time back up to this very moment. Although I had the documents I was told to bring, I couldn't help feeling that something bigger, something out of my control like a new change in the COVID rules would pop up out of nowhere and put us back into me misery. I headed into Terminal 5 to double check what time the check-in counter opened so that I would be first in line, which would allow us that little extra time to solve any unwanted obstacles if any should arise. Turns out I had gotten there way too early and there was a short while to go until they opened for check-in. I went back outside and just took a moment to take in the fresh air and compose myself as I watched other flights taking off, making us realise just how close I really was to starting a new chapter in life. I had been so caught up in worrying about something going wrong that I had dared not to dream what adventures would await us if I do get granted access to my flights, and on that thought, I told myself it's time to meet me fate and find out if I would be boarding the plane to my next destination or if this was the end of the road. I got back with a few minutes to spare and counted down the last minute till check-in opened for the flight to Qatar, where I would board my final flight to Bangladesh. If I'm honest, at this point I felt more nervous than ever before.
So I've just came to check in there. I was first in line and the guys at the counter told me I need to book my hotel where I'm going to be quarantining in Bangladesh for 4 days. I need to book it now before I go there, so I'm going to do that now.
Then I was given a list of hotels I could book from, which put us under a lot of pressure as I like to check out my hotels online and read reviews before booking with them.
Question?
Because 7 days, yeah? Mandatory.
But this was no time to faff on, as rules are rules, and after a very quick search of every hotel online, I settled for one and proceeded to ask the question that would make or break us.
All good to go?
Yeah. I just need to circle it and I need to give you a consent form just to fill in to say I've taken a picture of your, what's it called?
I could not believe it. I was being granted permission to board the plane and suddenly adrenaline just took over my body. I went through customs and had to tell myself to stay composed because total joy had just took over my mind. But I hadn't boarded the flight yet and still had a way to go to get on the plane. Let us tell you one thing now, Heathrow Airport is absolutely huge, like seriously big. Little did I know I would have to now catch a train from the lower levels underground to the departure point. Once off the train, I headed up to the departure point where I got a better chance to check out the hotel which I had booked to stay in for the Bangladesh quarantine. I felt oddly calm as I sat in the departure lounge waiting for the announcement to board the plane, and all the noise around us seemed to drown out as I tried to picture what was to come ahead when I got to Bangladesh. And it was time. I took the final steps onto the plane as I prepared to leave the country. The plane was empty. This made us realise what lengths I had went to just to earn me seat, any seat on this flight, which would take us to my motherland. And before I knew it, I was jetting off into the night sky to a faraway land.